We're ranking 10 well-known Sith Lords from weakest to most powerful, using 4 concrete measures: force mastery, demonstrated feats, combat ability, and lasting impact on the galaxy. That means reputation and single highlight clips don't decide placement. Instead, each Sith is judged by what they actually did, how they used the Force in decisive moments, how they performed in combat, and how their actions reshaped galactic history. These criteria force trade-offs. A Sith who dominates in raw Force power can still rank below one who survived decades of plotting and altered governments or spawned entire cults. Conversely, a brilliant schemer with limited combat feats will lose to a warrior who reliably turned battles and killed Jedi with ease. We'll count down from number 10 up to number 1, applying those 4 measures consistently so placements reflect both power and consequence. Expect concrete examples, key duels, canonical displays of Force ability, strategic victories, and the long-term fallout each Sith left behind. With that framework set, we begin the countdown, starting with the 10 who, within this group, showed the least combination of power and lasting effect. Number 10, Darth Maul. Maul sits at number 10 because he is a near-perfect specialist, one of the deadliest lightsaber duelists and assassins the galaxy has seen, but limited beyond the blade. His double-bladed saber, relentless aggression, and acrobatic speed let him dominate one-on-one fights. He kills Qui-Gon, nearly destroys Obi-Wan at Naboo, and repeatedly routs Jedi in the Clone Wars. Surviving being bisected, he rebuilds himself into a hardened criminal leader, runs the Shadow Collective, and briefly seizes Mandalore. Those moments show tactical cunning, a knack for guerrilla warfare, and extraordinary personal resilience. What Maul rarely shows is the kind of deep, system-altering Force mastery or long-term political vision that higher-ranked Sith demonstrate. He is often reactive, a brilliant tool of Palpatine's early plans, then a vengeful fringe actor whose greatest achievements are violent and immediate rather than transformative. Maul's legacy is terrifying combat and an uncanny ability to survive and come back. But when measured against repeatable reality-bending Force displays, durable institutional control, and multi-era dominance, he falls short. Number 9, Count Dooku, Darth Tyrannus. Dooku ranks above Maul because he combines elite lightsaber technique with large-scale political reach. As Count Dooku, he was a respected Jedi Master. As Darth Tyrannus, he perfected Makashi, Form 2, becoming the greatest classical swordsman in the prequel era. He defeats Qui-Gon, holds his own against Yoda, and regularly bests Jedi in single combat. Beyond the blade, he is a consummate manipulator. He recruits the Separatist leadership, orchestrates a galaxy-spanning war, and acts as Palpatine's public face to seed chaos. Still, Dooku's weaknesses are consistent. He is a brilliant operative who is repeatedly outplayed by the architect of the Sith plan, Palpatine, and ultimately falls to Anakin, whose unchecked power and desperation outmatch him. Dooku's Force feats are impressive, notably advanced Force lightning and telekinetic duels, but they stay within war and duel contexts. He shapes history through politics and war leadership, yet lacks the singular, repeated Force miracles and survival through centuries that mark the very top Sith. Number 8, Darth Malak. Malak is placed in the lower middle because he exemplifies overwhelming, open-field brutality rather than refined mastery or subtle influence. In Knights of the Old Republic, he becomes the Dark Lord of the Sith who leverages industrial might, the Starforge, to build fleets, crush Republic forces, and wage total war.
Malak's strength is strategic weight. He can turn whole systems into battlefronts and devastate the Republic with resources and numbers. But his methods are blunt. He relies on artifacts and massed force, rather than subtle manipulation or repeated, extraordinary Force phenomena. Malak's rise is marked by betrayals, exploitation of military advantage, and an over-reliance on the Starforge. His fall comes when a former apprentice and a redeemed opponent exploit his predictable brutality. He is terrifying in a KOTOR-era theater of war sense, one Dark Lord who can win wars, but he does not consistently deliver the nuanced, reality-warping feats or sustained political dominance that place a Sith in the upper tiers. Number 7,
Darth Bane. Bane is ranked here because his significance is institutional as much as personal. He didn't need to be the single most powerful duel master to matter. He reshaped the Sith itself by founding the Rule of Two, a doctrine that ensured Sith survival in the shadows and directly enabled the eventual rise of Darth Sidious. Bane's dark side scholarship is deep. Sith alchemy, secret techniques, and ruthless strategic thinking make him a dangerous opponent in single combat, and his actions after the Ruusan-era cataclysm set the stage for two Sith to rule in secrecy. That institutional influence outranks many raw feats, but Bane's personal demonstrations of the Force are less frequently shown as ongoing, galaxy-toppling miracles. He is a master strategist and a formidable duelist, and his doctrinal legacy arguably outstrips his catalogue of repeated supernatural demonstrations. In short, Bane is a tectonic figure who guarantees the Sith's future power, but he does so more by changing rules and institutions than by performing epoch-defining Force spectacles himself. These four entries establish the lower half of our top 10, specialists and system builders who are deadly in their domains but who lack the full package. Unambiguous, repeatable Force supremacy, prolonged galactic control, and the repeated single-actor miracles that separate the elite few above them. Maul and Dooku dominate duels and politics in their ways. Malak wins wars through industrial-scale force. Bane wins by changing the game itself. The next group brings figures who combine battlefield-shaping power with long-term consequences and more consistent, high-level Force displays. With Bane's institutional changes as the backdrop, we move into the middle tier. Sith who marry advanced dark side techniques with strategic reach or lasting supernatural effects. These are the characters who shape wars, haunt centuries, or reinvent what the Force can do, without quite reaching the sustained, galaxy-defining supremacy of the top three. Number 6 through 4 are where battlefield-shaping power and long-term consequences start to matter as much as individual dueling skill. Number 6. Exar Kun. Exar Kun belongs in this slot because his power was a mixture of lethal lightsaber skill and deep, corrosive sorcery that outlived his physical body. Once a Jedi prodigy, he fell into Sith teachings during the ancient Old Republic era, traveled to Sith tombs to learn forbidden rituals, and returned as a leader who brought the Sith into open conflict with the Republic and the Jedi. Where most Sith rely on brute telekinesis or lightning, Kun mastered Sith sorcery, rituals that could bind spirits, corrupt temples, and twist living minds. Those techniques allowed him to establish a spiritual foothold that persisted after his death. His spirit infested the Massassi ruins on Yavin 4, possessed followers, and became a recurring threat to the Jedi Order centuries later. That alone is a major reason he's above purely martial Sith. His influence repeatedly forced Jedi coalitions to act and required ritual countermeasures rather than just winning a duel. His limits are also telling.
Exar Kun's greatest displays are site-dependent and ritual-driven. He needed artifacts, temples, and occult knowledge to translate personal power into empire-scale control. He never demonstrated the same level of fleet-level or political manipulation as Revan or Plagueis, nor did he single-handedly overturn galactic institutions. His specialty, sorcery and spiritual corruption, makes him uniquely dangerous in the Old Republic context, and it explains his mid-tier placement. More than a duelist, less than a universal architect of the Force. Number 5. Darth Revan. Revan sits here because of rare versatility. Strategist, combatant, and a Force user who operated at top levels in both light and dark disciplines. Militarily, Revan's fingerprints are everywhere in the Mandalorian Wars and the subsequent Jedi Civil War. He reorganized fleets, executed multi-theater campaigns, and seized assets like the Starforge to put industrial-scale war-making into Sith hands. That tactical genius is a kind of Force power in itself. Battle meditation and the ability to shape outcomes across entire campaigns, except Revan also backed it up with personal feats. He could duel the best, survive extreme moral and psychological reversals,
and pick up techniques from Jedi and Sith alike, making him an unpredictable opponent. What keeps Revan from the top three is scope and continuity. His narrative is defined by oscillations, Sith Lord, redeemed Jedi, seeker of unknown threats, and by the fact that his most universe-shifting plans were often undone or redirected by others. Revan's greatest accomplishments were strategic and institutional, building an empire, toppling factions, and altering the balance of power. Those are massive impacts, but they differ from the singular force miracles or century-spanning dominance that mark the few above him. He's the consummate middleweight. When Revan leads, wars end. When he fights, he rivals the best. But he rarely performs the kind of once-and-for-all force act that permanently rewrites reality. Number 4. Darth Plagueis. Plagueis earns this rank through unparalleled technical mastery and a threat profile that is subtler but potentially more dangerous than brute force. He is the researcher of the dark side, obsessed with causality, life, and the midichlorians that connect living beings to the Force. The core of his claim to near-top status is the alleged ability to manipulate life and death. Experiments intended to prolong life, to stave off death, and possibly to create life. Those are not glamour feats like planet draining or avalanche-scale force pushes. They are the kind of knowledge that could, in the right hands, dismantle the ultimate constraint on power, mortality itself. Beyond laboratory-style accomplishments, Plagueis operated through covert influence. His apprenticeship of Palpatine positioned him to reshape galactic politics indirectly, a quiet engineering of power that culminated in the Republic's fall under his pupil. Plagueis's handicap is primarily empirical. He's far more famous for theory and secret experiments than for proven, repeated battlefield miracles. The record shows enormous potential rather than endless demonstrations. He was killed by his apprentice before he could fully realize or weaponize some of his loftier projects. That tragic cut-short arc keeps him from being placed among the very top Sith, because the final yardstick here is demonstrated, repeatable influence on galactic events and clear combat supremacy. Plagueis comes close by virtue of what he understood about the Force and what those discoveries implied. But he never quite turned those implications into open, irrevocable displays on the scale of Sidious or Nihilus.
These three exemplify what the middle tier means for our ranking. Deep, often unique command of the Force, combined with strategic or supernatural consequences that shape eras, but lacking the constant, imperious demonstrations of power that mark the apex. Exar Kun is the dark sorcerer whose presence persisted as a spiritual contagion. Revan is the battlefield genius who controlled wars and adapted between Jedi and Sith mastery. Plagueis is the scientist of death who nearly rewrote the rules of life. Having covered these mid-tier powerhouses, we now move into the apex Sith, the three figures whose feats, sustained dominance, or unique, destructive specializations place them above almost every other dark side user. Number 3. Darth Nihilus. Nihilus earns this slot because nothing else on the list matches his specific, catastrophic capacity to erase life on a planetary scale. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, Legends, he isn't just a powerful Sith, he becomes a walking vacuum for the Force. Nihilus can reach across a battlefield, a city, even an entire world, and drain the Force from every living thing there. The canonical depiction and the game mechanics line up. Entire populations fall into lifelessness, planets are left spiritually barren, and whole fleets or armies are unmade in an instant. If your measure is raw destructive specialization, the ability to remove life and Force presence en masse, Nihilus is unmatched. That specialization is also his ceiling. Nihilus's ability depends on consumption. He must move from source to stave off his hunger. That hunger prevents him from building stable political power or running sustained campaigns. He consumes what he needs and then has to move on. In KOTOR 2, the Jedi exile and allies confront him aboard his flagship, the Ravager, and sever the bond that lets him feed. That confrontation demonstrates both his vulnerability to focused opposition and the fact that his dominance is situational, not structural. In short, phenomenal at annihilation, but limited by an insatiable need and by a lack of strategy beyond feeding. That combination puts him at number 3, colossally dangerous in scale, narrowly specialized in scope. Number 2, Darth Vader. Darth Vader sits at number 2 because he combines raw, demonstrable combat power with sustained operational effect across the galaxy. As a duelist and enforcer, he is one of the deadliest Force users ever shown. He dominates lightsaber engagements, overwhelms opponents with brutal telekinetic strength, and uses Force choke and other techniques as tools of battlefield control. Canon and expanded material repeatedly show him dispatching Jedi, hunting down survivors after the rise of the Empire, crushing uprisings, and commanding fear as an instrument of rule. Those are concrete, repeatable demonstrations of martial superiority and strategic impact. What prevents Vader from taking the top spot are 2 constraints. First, his body. Grievous burns and cybernetic replacement mean he operates inside a life support suit that limits stamina, flexibility, and the subtlety of Force application. Vader is unmatched in direct, brutal displays of power, but his physical condition narrows what he can do compared with an uninjured master. Second, his agency. For most of his career as Vader, he serves as Palpatine's instrument. He enacts terror, enforces policy, and wins battles, but he rarely marshals institutions or shapes long-term political structure the way a ruler can. His most decisive political act, killing Sidious, comes at the end and is as much personal as systemic. Even so, as a combatant and commander, he outclasses nearly every other Sith. His combination of dueling skill, telekinetic dominance, and battlefield leadership makes him the deadliest individual operative short of the one who built the system he served. Number 1, Darth Sidious. Darth Sidious takes the top spot because he turned personal mastery of the dark side into durable, systemic control of the galaxy. Sidious is exceptional in combat. Precise lightsaber work, advanced lightning, devastating telekinesis, and a range of dark side sorcery and deception make him lethal in single combat. He stands toe-to-toe with the Republic's best, survives prolonged duels against powerful Jedi, and uses both overt power and subtle manipulation to neutralize opponents. But what separates Sidious from everyone else is political genius married to Force mastery. He engineered the Clone Wars, exploited the emergency power system, and used a manufactured conflict to destroy the Jedi Order and remake the Republic into the Galactic Empire. That is not a single act of overwhelming force. It is a sustained campaign of deception, co-optation, and calibrated violence that reshaped institutions, law, and culture. Sidious translated personal power into bureaucratic control, military infrastructure, and a propaganda apparatus that kept him in power for decades. He also trained and manipulated apprentices, controlled events at multiple levels, and deployed esoteric Force techniques when required. The result is repeatable, systemic dominance rather than a one-off massacre or a hunger-driven rampage. Sidious does have blind spots. He underestimates individual rivals and is occasionally undone by his own manipulations. But those flaws don't erase the scale of what he achieved. He not only defeated or neutralized the Jedi as a fighting force, he built an empire that enforced his rule and perpetuated his will. That combination of supreme personal ability, tactical lethality, and unmatched political orchestration is why Sidious sits at number 1, Vader at number 2 for unparalleled martial command despite physical limits, and Nihilus at number 3 for catastrophic but narrowly specialized power. The ranking uses 3 measures: raw force ability, the scale and decisiveness of a Sith's feats, and their lasting political or cosmic consequences. Palpatine tops the list because he meets all 3. His Force mastery is elite, but his distinction is turning personal power into systemic control, engineering wars,
legal authority, and an imperial machine that reshaped the galaxy for decades. Vader is second. His martial dominance and battlefield impact are almost unrivaled, even constrained by injuries and political subordination. Nihilus ranks high for an almost supernatural capacity to consume worlds, but his effect is narrowly destructive rather than institutionally enduring. In short, supreme Sith power combines force mastery, decisive action, and sustained influence. Raw might matters, but the ability to convert it into history matters more. Sidious did that better than any other, so he tops this list.